everybody. This is the Constitution Call. We're here with Jim, Low Tide, and Miss Yoki joined in, and we have RJack and a bunch of members that are chiming in. Today is 10/18/2024, and I'm going to turn the mic over to Jim, and y'all take your notes and pens out because you never know what's going to come out of his mouth. So just be very, very ready. Ask your questions throughout the call. He'll be pausing and ask for questions too. So jump right in. Thanks a bunch for being here. Go ahead, Jim.
Well, good evening, everybody. I'm happy to let you guys know that you live in a restored country. Ponder what that means to you. A restored country. Everyone on this call has lived their entire life under the yoke of a bunch of corporate strangleholds. Well, October 1, one of those corporate strangleholds ceased to exist. The all caps version of United States Inc. no longer exists. This is the municipal corporation that everyone thought of as the municipality. The Washington, D.C. organization no longer exists. The state of organization no longer exists, and neither do the county level municipal organizations. So over a century ago, Norton versus Shelby County was a court case that challenged agency or non-congressional delegated authority. And a few years back, West Virginia EPA reaffirmed the basic tenets. In the Chevron deference case, it reaffirmed if it's not a congressionally issued item, it was overreach and not constitutional. With the removal of United States Inc. in the landscape, we've gained an element of our freedom back. And there's also been an announcement of a change of government underway. The Federation of States has reaffirmed American land law in all of the states of the Union. So the civil side of existence is being toppled and reorganized. So if you take out your driver's license and look at the name on it, it's in all caps, and under Roman civil law, that is a franchise. Those franchises have been claimed back out of a bankruptcy. A good number of years, another entity that we all grew up, the United States of America, Inc., went Chapter 7 international bankruptcy. And the reason you've never been able to find it because it was an international bankruptcy, most likely created under the G7. So unless you had access to that platform, the media certainly wasn't going to yell from the rooftops about it. Another event that has happened since the 1st of October is all 3,100 plus county sheriffs have been given notification they are to enter the peacekeeping office as sheriff. For the last 160 plus years, they've been functioning as a corporate doorknob rattling Pinkerton service in the de facto. A number of years prior, there was a court case called Mack and Prince versus USA. And the United States Supreme Court came down and told the sheriffs, you can uphold the Constitution if you choose to, if you want to. Well, with this reassignment into peacekeeping capacity, it's no longer if. It's now mandatory. It's a ministerial obligation for the sheriffs. Now they're having to ascertain who and what you are. Are you an American, a U.S. citizen, or a citizen of the United States? We will still have certain courts wrapped around us for the U.S. citizen and the citizen of the United States. The citizen of the United States is a federal municipal employee from D.C. We're about to undergo a 90% reduction in federal level employees. Some 10 to 12 million are affected in this restructuring. So I have posted a couple of articles this evening. One's called The Gold Standard, and the other one's The Change of Government Underway. I also posted a American Federation article about bank fraud. Back in the day of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's administration, when he confiscated gold from our parents and grandparents and great-grandparents, 6,000 tons went to the Federal Reserve. Some of it went to the IMF, the World Bank, possibly the Bank of International Settlements received some of it. A grand accounting and demand has been launched. In April, the American Federated Gold-based dollar was proclamated into international awareness. So the Federal Reserve note that we all have been utilizing all of our life is about to undergo a dynamic change. Before the end of the year, I expect a notice to go out at the banks and the credit union levels, giving everyone a notification that we have a limited time to which to empty out the pillowcase and the mattress and bring everything in for a trade out. The American States and Nations Trade Bank is establishing trade banks across the country. And each state of the union, and that's a capital U on union, not a little u on union, because we've been played semantic deceits all of our life. Each State of the Union is getting a prosperity institution that resembles a credit union, but they will not be functioning in the traditional sense of what we have been used to. Behind our back for the last 160 plus years, labor bonds were placed on each generation. And then under the Townsend Maternity Act, when they started issuing birth certificates in big numbers, they created usufructuary trusts behind our back. And then Social Security came out. That's another financial instrument that we're owed back, because that program was only set up for federal municipal employees. So unless you actually got a federal government paycheck, most likely you were never eligible for the program, and then you also never had federal income. There's a lot of information coming out that we're owed a lot of assets, the true title to our cars, the land we know as America, and a whole slew of other instrumentalities that we have never been privy to. Because behind our back, the banking realm created all kinds of trading opportunities for itself, some of which people have heard of the straw man and the tin man from the Wizard of Oz. Under the Code of Federal Regulations 49 CFR 300 through 399 are created a bunch of definitions to which people have never been properly clued in unless someone happens to be a certain kind of an attorney. Some of these definitions, you'll see the word exemption or exception. Well, we, the American people, were the exception to the rules for commercial commerce. But they set in motion a system under semantic deceit and admiralty law so that we all functioned as corporate business entities with consent of the governed. Well, that was an implied consent. Well, that implied consent is being challenged, called on the carpet. And corrections are being made right now. One of the things that's been discovered, that every last one of us had been stolen off the land and soil and recategorized not as an American, but as a British territorial citizen, subject of the King of England, here in America, providing goods and services to the American people if you could find one. In 1858, second session of Congress, that Congress started changing definitions behind our back. And once they changed the definitions, they set them down and walked away. Oftentimes leaving them ignored for 20 to 30 years and then going back and picking them back up and saying, wow, no one objected, so everyone's consenting. In large part, they repeated this pattern time and again behind our backs. So in the international record, it appears that we consented to just walk off the American shore into the ocean, over the horizon, never to be seen again, emptying out and vacating America, according to the official narrative behind our back. Well, in order to overcome this, as a thing is bound, so it is unbound. You have to literally walk backwards out of the ocean onto the shore and reclaim yourself. In part, this is where the TV show The Castaways, Gilligan, being lost at sea, Castaway with Tom Hanks. These were actually disclosures to people if they were sharp enough to catch it. In the movie Castaway, Tom Hanks was finally discovered, brought back, and he'd been gone so long they declared him missing and presumed dead. And in the movie, Tom is told, well, man, you've been gone a long time. You have all kinds of paperwork to sign in order to get your life back. Study to show yourself approved. The names on our birth certificate are not ours. They are a business entity trust, created a decedent estate, and we're left with a false impression that it is actually us. Well, you have to come back and reclaim yourself. So upstream in the Constitution channel, I put a basic document that allows most people to reclaim themselves. It's called a 1779 one-pager. You use this instrument, and at the end of, I believe it's paragraph 3, there is a space there for you to put your birth date on the document. It doesn't matter on what state you're currently living on. You got your inherent God-given birthright from the state on which you were born. And that's what you're reclaiming. As a Californian, a Texan, Floridian, Oklahoman, Montanan, New Yorker. And that's what that instrument was designed to do. And in the neighborhood of that one-page instrument, there are something called a witness testimony. You need 2 copies of this document. You need to get 2 passport quality pictures and put the picture on this instrument, and then go find 2 people that are willing to say they know you. And this is usually the difficult part for most people. And what they're being asked to do is to go to a notary and say, okay, you see this picture? I know this character in this picture, and I know this character by this name, and I'm willing to lay claim that I know them. That's all they're asked to do with that. And then we need a scanned copy of your birth certificate. Your birth certificate is actually evidence of multiple crimes that have been committed against you. And with a scanned copy, it allows the Federation of States an instrumentality of the American government that has been in the background since 1776. It has always been here. However, people don't know about it because in 1976, Jimmy Carter took American history out of the school systems, and they left U.S. history in place for everyone to assume that that was American history. Well, in the early 1900s, the teaching universities that taught the teachers who became the professors, who taught the teachers who are teaching today, were infiltrated and the entire education system was subverted and dumbed down. Today, the public, PUBLIK system, SISTUM, does a pathetic job. I graduated in 1975 from a little community outside of Seattle, Washington. And many of the books that we went through school were from the early 60s, if not late 1950s. The 1850s books still had a high degree of accuracy. In part, anybody under the age of 64 has an incomplete comprehension of this gin joint called America. And this was on purpose. If you don't know who you are and how you got here, you wouldn't know that you'd been swapped out and lied to. So for the 160 plus years, we've been lied to, lied about behind our back, cornswoggled, flim-flammed, ripped off and conned. Well, the perpetrators of these events have been called on the carpet, some of which is the King of England. Oh, and by the way, there hasn't been a proper King of England or Queen of England in 3 centuries plus. That's a whole different rabbit hole. But they also took cursive or script writing out of the school system, and they did it on purpose. Because if you don't know how to do it, you won't be able to systematically read the old documents, and they get relegated to the dustbin of history because there's no perceived connection to them. And one of these little dusty rags of history is called the Declaration of Independence. Most people are not aware of how close they came to losing this place called America. This historical body called the Federation of States became aware of our situation, and they issued a clarion call. Ollie, ollie, oxen free, are there any Americans out there? And they listened for a response. And some Americans that actually knew that they were Americans and why they were Americans responded from Texas. And it gave a building block platform to rebuild America with. And then 2 people out of California responded. And then we were off to the races in a rebuilding restoration project. Well, I'm happy to say all 50 states of the Union of States are alive and well and accounted for. So the end goal is the restoration of the American government as it was created by our founding fathers. The American government was actually set up as a republican form of government. Not a republic, but as a republican form. In part, this is where we get the government of the people, for the people, by the people. Your government is supposed to be run by you and your neighbors. It starts at the kitchen table, extends from the family to the neighborhood, out into your community, and then into your county, and then up statewide through a mechanism called an assembly. The assemblies function as committees of the whole, not the typical top-down corporate hierarchy we're all familiar with. Take the pyramid that we're used to and turn it point down and put the people at the top, at the broadest point, at the new top. And as the pyramid narrows down, it's less and less and less authority, till all that's left at the point at the bottom is the hired help. Back in the day of Abraham Lincoln, folks, we were infiltrated. This infiltration had several different goals. First of all was to do an end run around the constitutional contracts that were created through the Treaty of Peace of 1783 and the Treaty of Versailles. And then to do an end run around the Declaration of Independence by way of fraud and semantic deceit. Utilizing a foreign corporation out of Edinburgh, Scotland, known as the United States of America, Inc., whose paperwork was lodged in Delaware. And then this corporation was spirited into Washington, D.C., and then they masqueraded this corporation by ever so conveniently leaving off Inc. off the end. And then they masqueraded as us. Think of this corporation as a gigantic credit card hacking operation, but at a nationality level. This corporation had all of the states rewrite a corporate charter known as the state of Kansas, state of Pennsylvania, state of California. Well, this state of enterprise has county level sub-chartered corporate organizations. And they come in two flavors, by the way. One is a municipal corporate charter for the state of whatever in all caps, and an upper lowercase spelling from the British territorial contractor that Abraham Lincoln smuggled into America. So before the so-called Civil War, there were 34 states of the Union. And after the Civil War, the other 16 that came along were simply business entities created on paper being managed as a state trust. The state of Washington is such a trust entity. State of Oregon is a British territorial or municipal corporation, and you'll only recognize it by how it is spelled. So you have the Oregon State Trust. You'll see Oregon State, Kansas State, New York State. This is the trust. Now, for you who are on the Eastern Seaboard, you have another creature out there known as the Commonwealth Enterprise. I'm going to pick on Virginia, little old Virginia. So you walk out your front door, take off your shoes, wiggle your toes in the green grass, and you're standing on Virginia. Just plain Virginia. And all those land and soil assets are held in the Virginia State Trust. Then you have the British territorial state of Virginia in upper lowercase spelling. And it is an incorporated business entity created under foreign law, not American law, foreign law. And then you have the state of Virginia in all caps. That's the municipal enterprise. And then you have the Commonwealth of Virginia. Well, in the old terms, Commonwealth or Commonwealth properties were church-held properties managed for widows, orphanages, that kind of mechanism, to have charity for the poor. Most likely, as an American, you don't reside in the Commonwealth. If you happen to be a federal municipal employee, you might straddle both fences, being a municipal employee and a resident of the Commonwealth. In the school system, we were not taught the power of the vocabulary we were being taught. For the last 100+ years, the language we've been taught takes us down the cattle chute of slavery and subjectivity of the King of England and the Vatican. Here in America, there is the American common law. However, Abraham Lincoln imported Roman Empire civil code, the law of the Holy Roman Empire. So when you look at that big stone edifice in D.C. called the Lincoln Monument, what you're actually looking at is a worship temple. Find a picture of old Abe sitting in the big chair and get a close-up and look underneath his fingers in the face of the chair. You're going to see the Roman colonnade structure of the Roman fascia. The Roman fascia was held and carried by Caesar in public display of the authority of the empire. So what you're looking at is a worship temple to the first installed American Roman Caesar. By the way, Honest Abe wasn't necessarily so honest. The Lincoln family, back in the day of our colonial escapades against tyranny with the King of England, were loyal Tory family. And so were the Grant family. Well, this character at the time of Lincoln, who we today know as Ulysses S. Grant, his real name was Hiram. So adopting the moniker U.S. Grant, as in the U.S. getting a grant access to us in substitution of the real American government, masquerading as us to the world, gained control of the banks, access to our national credit, wanting to reimpose a national bank. This laid the foundation for one of the most heinous, global, internationally recognized commercial crimes against mankind. So this corporation, known as United States of America, Inc., set in motion a grand fraud. And they did things like taking our American gold and starting shipping to the caves of the Philippines to cashier away our gold with a plan. They were setting in motion a grand bankruptcy scheme to bankrupt their corporation, pawning off the bankruptcy as America going bankrupt. This event happened in 1906, culminating in 1907. Hey folks, we don't have enough gold to pay the bills. America is bankrupt. Well, the bankruptcy trustees laid claim to all the assets and put English title on America. And then they really went seriously rogue on us to miscategorize every last soul as a resident. If you look up the Residence Act of 1790, you'll find that piece of legislation was passed in connection with the 19 Delegated Service Authority contract we gave to the King of England for some selective services. This 1790s Act allowed and authorized the King's people to be here to provide those services. Today, in 2024, something around 22 to 24 million people on American shores are here providing contracted services to the American people, and they are the true residents. There's great discussion among the 50 states about revoking some of our old legislation because in the modern era, America has grown up. We have the infrastructure, we have the skill set and the expertise to provide our own services, whereby some of these 22 to 24 million affected people may be required to decamp from our shores. Anybody who has a bar card is directly affected. The bar card is evidence of an allegiance to the King of England and the King's civilian militia, and they have been stealing and robbing and pillaging everything under the sun to hand it back to the King of England. December 23rd of 2022, international note of fraud and treason was issued against the American people to the bar. Today, there currently exists a $279 trillion lien against all bar members. So if you currently know anybody who's in the middle of law school, it would be greatly appreciated if you would put a bug in their ear and say, wherever you are in your law education, it would be highly advisable for you to concentrate on constitutional American common law. Imagine being mom and dad who's 50, 60, 70 years old, having been raised with the notion of go to college, get a good education, make something of yourself, be it a lawyer, a doctor, or a dentist, only to find out they were propagandized. And how so? These are 3 professions under Title 37. They have actually been conscripted into the U.S. military system as ununiformed military officers. So if you go back and visit some of the old series known as MASH, Hawkeye and Pierce are having a discussion. I don't know how I ended up here in Korea. And they are having this discussion. Well, when they got out of medical school and they passed the test, little did they know they ended up with a military commission as a captain in the military corps. Medical corps. And that medical corps stems from a contract created under those 19 delegated service agreements oh so long ago. One of the very first service contract requests is we had pirates marauding our merchant fleets up and down the eastern seaboard and in the Caribbean. And the King of England at that time had the finest navy on the seas. So we asked for some help. And the King's people, certainly we can provide that service. And that's how the U.S. Navy came into its authorized existence. It has always been under foreign contract with foreign paymasters. And then over time came the rest of the services. The second contract request was, at that time, we were a newfound country of primarily farmers. And we each, as farmers, sent our agent out into the marketplace to sell off our crop. Peanuts, tobacco, cotton, whatever it was. But our agent sometimes didn't get it all sold, so it just sat in the barn. And so if we told you, dear Kingy, what we had in the barn, do you think you could take it out into the international community and mark it up a few shillings and make some money out of it? And the King's agent said, certainly, we can do that for you. And this is where the Department of Commerce came into existence. Well, many of us scattered across the country take on a part-time role as a researcher. Someone came across the Naval Agency Distribution Act of 1864, where the King's people were authorized to come ashore, and their head of state of the ship of state, because they brought their own naval ship ashore, was called the Secretary of State. That's the character in Washington, D.C. And then under their broad new franchises known as the state of entity, you have a Secretary of State of the state of entity. He's an underling of DC. So all hospitals over time have been military establishments managed by British military officers known as doctors, whereby they conscript mom to relieve you of your American birthright and abandon it, whereby they reclaim you and designate you as a British territorial subject citizen abandoned on the field, and mom is an informant on the document. With that document, you existed as a baby for, say, 2 to 3 weeks. Look on yours. Look at the birthday and then see the registration day. For that time period, you existed as a living, breathing, bouncing baby girl or baby boy. And then on that registration day, that's when they created the usufructuary instrument, given a name to that instrument that sounds like you, but it's not, probated your estate, declared you dead on paper, and we also found out that many of us have been granted the rank of warrant officer in the Queen's Merchant Mariner Services. Warrant officer on a cruise ship would be known as a purser. When the cruise ship comes into port, they handle the ship's money, buys supplies, pays port fees, collects taxes. And on a cruise ship, they even handle the money of the people paying for the cruise. Well, under a US-UK tax treaty, they're obligated to fill out something known as a 1040 form to hand over the gift and estate taxes to the Crown. Not one penny collected in the income tax pays for anything in America. Not one toothpick, telephone pole, baseball bat is paid with taxpayer money. Under Title 27, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, there was something called a Puerto Rican transmitting utility. Under Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and an account was opened up using a similar name to you, or you, or you. I said you 3 times because each case it's spelled differently. There's little y-o-u, there's capital Y, little o, little u, and capital Y, capital O, capital U. Well, when Abraham Lincoln imported Roman code, he brought in Roman maxims of law. Under Capitis Diminutia Maximus, any name expressed in all caps is a business entity. Go get your driver's license and look at the name spelled on it. It's usually in all caps. So what you have is a municipal operational franchise, and your picture is on it as the recognizable authorized agent to the entity. Capitis diminutia medius is any name upper and lowercase. Well, these are persons of some kind. So you have the all caps person and you have the upper lowercase person. But we're not taught to think this way. We're not taught to recognize or ask the question of what kind of person is this? Well, the word law means land, air, and water, as in 3 jurisdictions. So there are 3 distinctive recognized types of persons. The all caps kind of person, being municipal in nature, is a corporate fictional entity. Upper lowercase is some kind of person, and so you have to ask where this person came from, what jurisdiction created it. In the public school system, they hardly teach us how to handle the lowercase letters, and that's on purpose. The lowercase I, that little dot at the top of the I, that is the head of the living. Under the Roman system, small letters is the highest degree of freedom and right in the Roman system. And the moment you capitalize the I, you decapitate the little I and lop off the head of the living, and they are dead. So any other kind of entity, person, is a dead fiction of some form in some jurisdiction. Do you feel decapitated or disempowered? Possibly disenfranchised, because that happened to you as well. In the process of the birth certificate, you've been disenfranchised of your American birthright and re-enfranchised as a British subject citizen living on the American continent, providing goods and services to the American people, if you can find one. Well, since October 1, with the bankruptcy of U.S. Inc., American land law has been reinstituted across America. And the condition of the U.S. military has been converted back once again to land and soil actual troops. So they have been restored to honest soldiery. The 50 states of the Union have their respective governments of the people, for the people, by the people, and that mechanism is called an assembly. I happen to be part of the Washington Assembly. Oregon has an assembly, New York has an assembly, Texas has an assembly, and every county in the 50 states has a county level assembly. So as we correct our status and standing back to that of an American, we repopulate the state assembly on which we live. And by default, we rehabit the county. The county assembly has the highest law recognition capacity, and that's where the law of the land meets the rubber in the road. A lot of you have heard scuttlebutt of the straw man and the tin man. Well, the straw man is your birth certificate, but you've never been properly taught how to have a relationship to it. What has been discovered over time is there are variations of spelling to the name on the birth certificate, both upper and lowercase, upper lowercase. So you have all caps, first name, middle name, last name. All caps, first name, last name. All caps, first name, middle initial, period, last name. And they've done this to the upper and lowercase name structures as well. Think of these names as subtle franchises of you, and maybe you. We help people to reclaim these and to treat them like tennis shoes. And when they can properly use them if they choose to. So think of each style of name as Nike, Adidas, Skechers, and for you ladies, we'll even probably get you a pair of Gucci's. We have an instrument called the Deed of Reconveyance that will help you reach out and reclaim control of these names created behind your back. Because over time, some of you have been adopted, some of you have been married and remarried. And we'll teach you how to reclaim every type of name you've ever used. You may be playwrights, artists. We'll help you reclaim those as well. So in reclaiming these names, you're going to take them out of the ocean, out from under the law of the sea, put them into dry dock, and then no one gets to walk in your shoes without first asking your permission, and then paying you a bunch of money to do so. Wouldn't it be nice to get paid for something on occasion? Oh, and by the way, this birth certificate thing you ladies were conned into signing up. Your marriage license from the state of entity is actually a business, whereby it's treated as a business partnership, and the state of business entity lays claim to 51% in a three-way operational relationship, controlling factor. And there's an old maximum of law: he who creates a thing controls the thing. So they created the license and they control its application. This is why you are categorized as a parent. Take the PA, split it apart from the rest of the word, and you pay rent. This is how the state of entity lays claim to your boys and girls. You get dragged through family court. Wouldn't you like to be able to eject that 51% control and actually be engaged in a lawfully recognized relationship, not a business partnership. So the power of the words that we have been taught, when you're asked a question and you respond accordingly, that is the power and authority of your standing. Now, in the Bible, it talks about Adam being given a job. He's to go out and name all the beasts and plants of the field. Well, when you respond, my name is, you're declaring that you're a beast of the field and not part of the Adamic side of the equation. How do you feel about that? To be looked upon as a beast of the field by the controllers. So there's something called a name at war, a nom de guerre, and that's what is on the birth certificate. Unbeknownst to most of you, you've been involved in a war that you neither see, feel, hear, or recognize, but nonetheless, yes, you've been involved in a war, 160-year plus war, involving fraud, semantic deceit, misrepresentation, kidnapping, impersonation, barratry, all of which violates the Geneva and the Hague Conventions and the 1926 Anti-Slavery Act. If you had been properly taught to say, I am Tom, I am Maria, I am Carla, I am Marcia, you would be on the Adamic side of the equation under the blessing of the Creator, not looked upon as a beast of burden in the field. So in 1858, this Congress that was substituted behind our back had already been infiltrated by agents of the Crown of England, and they ever so carefully started pushing forward an agenda, redefining certain words behind our back. So in 1858, second session of Congress, they redefined person and individual. Not in the everyday usage that we as people would recognize, but as a special definition in a foreign law. A person is an artificial entity of some kind. We've been heavily indoctrinated. Go out and grab the brass ring. What's in your wallet? Go out and make the world yours. Grab the bull by the horns. But we don't recognize many of the things that we've been taught actually put us in a condition of Stockholm Syndrome. We've been so lied to that we have mental relationships to the perpetrators of all this, thinking they're our good buddies. They are our elected officials. They work for us. When in relation, the swap out done under Abraham Lincoln, sidestepping the Declaration of Independence, striving to deprive you of your recognizable birthright, was done with malice aforethought and malicious intent. This was all by design for a 200-year ongoing systematic fraud, so that eventually no one had living, recognizable memory of how and what made them American. And certainly they couldn't read the Declaration of Independence, let alone recognize countries or know any world history of anybody outside their neighborhood, and they wouldn't give a care in the world to it. So in large part, since 1976, thankful to one Jimmy Carter, who was a U.S. Navy officer directly under the control of British Admiralty, who became the elected president of a foreign corporation who was a service provider to the American people. Really kickstarted this entire thing that we're living with today. So I'm going to paint a scenario to you. When you look at your paycheck and look at the federal withholding part of your check, thinking back that you actually don't work for Uncle Sam inside Washington, D.C. And you may not actually work for the municipal state of whatever that is in your state. Do you really have federal income? Well, earlier I said something to the effect about Title 27, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. Well, one of these versions of names of you is a Puerto Rican transmitting utility. And in the IRS's computers, you're engaged in alcohol, tobacco, and firearms related activity. And therefore, the IRS presumes they have the right to demand a 1040 form from you. And of course, everyone knows you have to pay income taxes. Well, what if you were conned into doing it voluntarily? What if in looking at your paycheck, you could take that withholding back into your life? What would it do for your standard of living? Pulling an extra $300 to $500 a week, or every 2 weeks, back into your household. We can show you how to do that lawfully. Some of you are going, well, if I don't pay income taxes, how will the government work? How will it function? Well, earlier I said that there were labor bonds and other instruments taken out on you. Well, we have also discovered in the course of research some historic trusts that are several centuries old, where the creators of the trust set money, gold, gems aside, and land grants for a future time for the betterment of mankind. Well, all of that was supposed to be made manifest in our faces in 1941. And everything since 1941 was supposed to be prepaid for the new of everything: roads, technology, education, health, science. However, these trusts were glommed onto and ignored as abandoned assets. The rightful owners couldn't be conveniently found, even though one particular owner of an entire family set of trusts lives in South Carolina. They just couldn't find him. After they kidnapped him, brought him to America, dumped him here, and then relabeled him as a U.S. citizen, stripping him of any claim and rightful process. Well, some of the accounts have so much money in them. Imagine a number with 26 commas in it. Way past trillions. And I've seen the ledger sheet on some of these accounts. Don't be fooled that government of the people, by the people, and for the people can't be funded. When the military started taking our gold off our shores in 1895, it laid the groundwork for the Federal Reserve to be implemented in 1913. In 1921, they started issuing birth certificates big time. Those birth certificates were sold on Wall Street. There are hedge funds that your birth certificate was dumped into. So based on what mom and dad were categorized on your birth certificate was pre-funded with a certain amount of money for an estimated lifetime accumulated earning potential of you. Let's say mom and dad were farmers. They may have funded your birth certificate for $500,000. All the way up to dad's a doctor or something like that. And they may have funded your birth certificate for upwards of $1 million. And it's been sitting on Wall Street being managed behind your back for however old you are. I used to be able to get into the instrumentality to show people their account. But so many people were going into that mechanism that it has been reprogrammed and I can no longer get into it. But I used to enjoy speaking to moms, showing mom her account. And occasionally I'd get a mom that had 3, 4, maybe 5 little ones. And I'd ask them, what is your youngest, a little boy or girl? What is their name? Well, little Tommy happens to be cute as a bedbug. He's 3 years old, rambunctious as all get out. Do you know little Tommy's social security number? And we enter it into the field. I would then take them to the bottom of the page and say, look at this. Let's say 15 of 887. That's how many transactions is on this 3-year-old. Mommy would look at me and go, get out. And I said, move it over. The first column on the left was the transaction number. How much, how long, the interest rate, move it over. There was the institution. Move it over a little more to the right, and there's the country that the institution was in. And move it over a little more, and I could show them whether it's current and active, expired, or subject to renewal. This happened to each and every last one of us. The Federation of State is ending this chicanery behind our back. Whatever's in that stock market fund, that labor bond placed behind our back on our ancestors, the Social Security account is a 10-year bond, and it's refinanced every decade. So by the time you hit 65, it's been refinanced 6 times. And we're all getting the crumbs off the accounts. That is being reclaimed. Now here in Washington, I discovered our driver's licenses carry a $5,000 bond on each renewal cycle. In July of 2021, in taking control of my car that I acquired and ended up obtaining the MCO of. And what the MCO is, the Manufacturer Certificate of Origination. This is the true title to our cars, trucks, boats, and RVs. I managed to get mine out of state. The dealership handed me over control of the car that I acquired for cash, and I never utilized a driver's license to get the car. I reached out to the state from where the car was acquired from and got a chain of title extract from him, and it yielded up the MCO. Many states have legislation on the books that require the dealerships within 3 days of getting whatever off the truck to send the state all the paperwork sent by the factory. And then all they give us as so-called residents is certificate of title. It says a title exists, but you don't actually have it. You're the keeper of state donated property. He who creates the thing controls the thing. He who creates the title controls the assets. So when you register something, Regis is a royal act. You give property back over to the King of England. You don't actually have control of it. You just have conditional use. The residents have what is known as leasehold rights. We as an American have freehold rights. A freehold is not subject to the whim of any other authority. Our ancestors got away from primogeniture, which is the allegiance to the king or duke, earl, baron, and entailments. As a serf living on a duke's land, you would pay him taxes, and if you didn't have money, it would be some kind of product that you would give to them, and they would forward a portion of it up to their king. Our ancestors did away with that system. So we Americans are not subject to entailments or primogeniture. As an American, you are owed absolute freehold. This is why this gin joint as America is known as the land of the free. You are truly free as a landlord. That you have been robbed of this. You can take your first steps in restoring being a landlord with that one-page document and the 2 witness testimonies. You'll find them upstream in the Constitution room. Well, that document, the one-pager, applies to most people. However, if you work for the city, the county, the state of entity, or Lord forbid, the municipality, you hold a dual citizenship condition. Yes, you can reclaim your birthright until you leave the job. You are straddling this dual citizenship. On the job, you are this resident. Once you leave the job, you can switch hats and be recognized as the American. But anything that happens to you while on the job, and a job is just above broke, or it's a jerk of a boss. You may not be entitled to all of your remedies. It depends on how they were created. Just because you do your paperwork, it isn't a silver bullet, as if going out to the horse trough, dunking your head, coming out, and feeling better. You've engaged in all kinds of contracts throughout your life. There's a document upstream that will allow you to recognize some of the contracts in your life. So once you file your one-pager and your witness testimonies, you can start cleaning up your life and taking self-control and governing yourself. So since America came back under American land law, it's frequently known as American common law. American common law is fairly simple, while the corporate realm has 80 million codes, statutes, regulations. And those codes, statutes, and regulations are not constitutional. However, if you choose to live under that yoke and thumb, good luck with you. Our American common law is based around the tenets of the Ten Commandments. You don't lie, you don't steal, you don't murder. We still have cattle rustling and horse thieving and claim jumping on the books. Everything in the de facto corporate realm is a commercial fine, so to speak, as a misdemeanor. And it might even be a felony. Well, you might end up going to jail as a misdemeanor for 6 months. And you might go to jail under a felony for a number of years. But those felonies in American common law can get you hung. And in some cases, you're eligible to be hung right on the spot. The nearest lamppost tree can be convenient. If you get caught shooting someone and murdering them, and you get caught right on the spot, so America itself, the land of the free, the home of the brave, is rebuilding itself. Resurgence is underway. Our end goal is to refill Philadelphia Hall, because that is where the true seat of the actual American government is. Each state has a state assembly. I encourage you to go and get that document. Get your one-pager filled out. And by the way, the one-pager is simple enough that you can take it to a standard notary and get it notarized. And upstream, there is a contact page. When you open it up, you're going to see the 50 states, and it's got a pulsing button on it. Touch the button, and the contact page for your respective state will open up. Fill it out, and someone from the state assembly will reach out to you. So if you're contemplating coming home to the land of the free, the pathway to do it is now much simpler than it was 5 years ago. It's been greatly streamlined, and the roadblocks have, in large part, been eliminated. So there is a document that says the American government, there's a change of government underway. I encourage people to download it and read it, and then share it. Many of us have been labeled as quacks, nut jobs, fruitcakes by our friends, some of our families. We've been outcast from family events. But reach out and share it with your closest people. Let them know that you still care about them. Because in the next 90 days, there's going to be a lot of structural changes, and it's going to be very bewildering to a lot of people. But if you give them a heads up, what is bringing this change, they don't have to sit there in fear. They can actually look in new hope with new eyes. and hope for a much better and brighter future. Well, it's 6:30, so I'm going to take time for questions. Anybody? Anybody got a question?
Well, this is RJax. You know I'm going to have a question. I'm sorry.
Come on down, RJ.
I was just curious. You said that we are now under common law and not the water law. I was wondering if that means that we are now kind of going into the NESARA, possibly.
Okay. I posted a bank fraud document at 4:32, and then right behind that at 4:35, the American Federated Dollar.
Okay, what does that mean?
Okay, so under NESARA, the Federal Reserve has gone bankrupt. They went bankrupt in 2009 and have been functioning on fumes. Many people have heard about Basel III banking compliance. It's a liquidity standard. So at the beginning of this year, 12 of the largest banks told credit card processors, effective January 14th, we're not going to need your services. And so the credit card processors typically charge 2.5% to 4% for credit card transactions to merchants and those of us who had some kind of credit card. Well, those intermediary services were being absorbed by the big banks because they needed that operation in-house, because going back to gold, we're eliminating usury. Our founding fathers had seen enough usury done in Europe. They were sick of it. So on April 5th, the Federation of States announced the replacement of the Federal Reserve utilizing something known as the American Federation gold-based dollar. I watched as the Federation redeemed two 1934 Series A gold bonds worth $600 million of gold based on 1934 values. At the time, that was a little over $15 trillion in gold. All the transport receipts for the gold transmitted to the Philippines are in possession of the Federation of States. The Federation of States is redeeming and recouping bonds, gold, silver, and other assets. The American Federation, in doing some of the accounting, found out that over time, inflation had eaten away the purchase value of the FRN to the point where it was like 2 cents to the dollar. Well, under Mr. Obama's watch, some printing presses and printing plates were smuggled out of America and given to certain countries, along with paper and ink. And those respective places chained the monkey to the printing press. So much that 40% of all money printed in the United States has been printed in less than 10 years. Out of the entire 240 some odd year history of America. 40% in just 10 years. When some of that became established and known, the actual purchase value was recognized at less than 180 FRNs to 1 cent. The federal rate of exchange is why gold just recently hit $2,700 an ounce. In the 1920s, with a $20 gold piece, you could go in, get a good dinner, a nice room, a good suit, a handful of cigars, and have money left over. Decent room, $150 a night. A good meal, there's another $100. A decent suit, upwards of $650. That's how much inflation or devaluation of purchase capability has happened over time. The American Federated Dollar is based on 1/10 of 1 ounce of gold. So whatever the floating value of gold is, 1/10 of an ounce is 1/10 of an ounce. So at $2,700 an ounce for gold, 1/10 of an ounce is 270 FRNs. The American Federation of States has rechartered a trade bank called the American States and Nations Trade Bank. It has chartered a relationship with what's known as the Global Family Bank. Institutions are being rebuilt across America that will allow the actual American people to have access to what we as America are owed. There are prosperity mechanisms coming on board. Now, in Franklin Delano Roosevelt's time, when he gave his 2 radio fireside chats, he put the federal municipal employees on the hook for taxes to the bankruptcy. And he put the British territorial U.S. citizens on the hook for paying taxes for the bankruptcies. In 1937, he put all the court systems under admiralty law. That's why the gold fringed flag is in the courtroom. All the judges are hired jurists for foreign courts. And those foreign courts are actually banking functions as international bill collectors. You just get dragged in because you don't comprehend that piece of mail that shows up in the mail location. That piece of mail has either all caps or upper lowercase. And if you happen to live in Illinois, it comes to IL. Or if you're in Texas, it comes to TX. In California, it's CA. Here in Washington, it's WA. You as an American don't have any business being in those courts. The Reconstruction Acts of the 1860s were never properly done, and we're just now getting around to do it. Earlier, I said there were 34 states of the Union during pre-Civil War. Well, come to find out, that was actually not a war. That was internationally recognized commercial mercenary action put on our shores we got caught up in. Because the contractors didn't let us properly know what was going on when Abraham Lincoln set our American business entity, known as the Federal Republic and the Confederation of States, to the side. And those two entities have not been functioning and have been MIA. And so they went rampant with us. Well, that fraud is now recognized. And the Federation has gone after the primary principals, the Lord Mayor of the City of London, the Pope, the Emperor of Great Britain. And the Great Britain is nothing more than a business entity, as well as the UK. That is a business entity. Well, we found out that Queen Anne stepped off the royal throne in 1707. And so when the Treaty of Peace of 1783 was negotiated, the king had no clothes because there was not a properly set king. The king got off the royal throne and went over and sat on the seat of the estates, as in your birth certificate estates. And this stems from the fire of the Sediscavy Act of 1666. This is how long they've been perpetrating a fraud. And even before then. So they enfranchised the English people, and then they enfranchised us, and then they enfranchised everybody else in the Commonwealth countries, New Zealand, Australia, many parts of Africa. That old saying that the sun doesn't set on Britannia, it's been that big of a fraud. And then they extended it to Europe and Japan. There's only like 5 actual countries that actually have its land and soil government still intact. And America is one of them. So when word was sent out over 200 plus countries made the fiduciary of the American government their fiduciary to help reclaim and reconstruct their governments. So America is leading the charge to reclaim everyone's rightful government in their respective country. And this is a worldwide move. Next question.
So this isn't really just NESARA that we're seeing. This is GESARA with the G for global. Is that correct?
Yep. Come to find out that during Napoleon's time, the Rothschilds had their agents far and wide. And during Napoleon's war, they had agents overlooking the battlefield. And when the tide of battle turned, the Rothschild writer headed for London. And he proclaimed, "Oh my God, we lost! Napoleon's coming! Napoleon's coming!" And everybody panicked and they sold all their stuff on the market. Well, the Rothschilds had their agents on the floor in the London Exchange. And they were just picking up anything and everything not nailed down. Well, a little while later, the real writer came in yelling, "We're victorious!" And the people are going, "What? What's happening?" And about that time, the Rothschild agents scurried like rats to the shadow. When everything was figured out, the Rothschilds had gained control of the Bank of England. Well, under Rothschild control, the Emperor of Prussia had lodged some gold into the bank, and so did the Tsar of Russia. Well, over the years, the bank has been notorious for not paying the creditor that they owe. Well, in the 30s, the Rothschilds went to the Emperor of China to pitch a deal to lease gold from the imperial family. And lo and behold, 6 weeks after everything was signed and sealed, the Boxer Rebellion broke out. And the royal imperial family was set upon and executed. Well, there just so happened to have been one of the minor princes in the back court who happened to be intrigued of landscaping and that kind of thing. And when the shots were fired in the imperial palace, one of the workers said, "Master, take off your cloak, take my jacket, put it on, and crawl up in the tree." And they hid his imperial cloak in a wheelbarrow, laid brush on top of it to camouflage it. And when soldiers came running out of the back of the palace asking, did they see anybody? They said, "Well, yeah, they went that way." And the soldiers took flight after this imaginary escapee. Well, it took a good many years to smuggle this young man out of China. And then it took a few decades later to smuggle the contract out. That contract was a coupon contract that allowed the tear off of coupons for periodic payment. But there was a performance clause in the contract that said if you submitted this contract for full redemption at the end of the contract without a payment being clipped. There was a overriding performance bonus. Well, in killing off the royal family, they never intended to pay back 1 ounce of gold. So that makes it a global problem. With global restoration owed. There used to be an industrialist by the name of Cecil Rhodes, and he had a big presence in Africa. And this is where the country called Rhodesia got its name. And this is how De Beers got control of the diamond mines out of South Africa. The British Empire systematically went into Africa and stripped it. And then by doing the 1040 and 1010 war bonds during Lincoln's time, we funded this Raj activity into India at our expense. So England started stripping India of assets. The Royal Crown, the Privy Council, Parliament, all those characters are at the bottom of virtually every single issue that we've ever had a problem with. The same condition exists in America today as they existed in 1776. If you're able to read the Declaration of Independence, you'll see the same things griped about. And one of those items is the king sends his agents to eat out our substance. Those are the attorneys. If you look under the Edwardian titles of nobility scale, and you finally get down to Royal Knight, the next office down is Esquire. Those are the attorneys. In England, they're known as solicitors. So many issues that we have, so does the rest of the world. That's why NESARA is global. Next question.
Okay, I have another question. This is Arjax again. Now that we are back to common law and the corporation is gone, when will we actually hear this publicly that this has happened? Good question, huh?
No. Today at 5:01, I posted an article, Change of Government Underway. Now, the various
that's
state
not
assemblies,
public. That's for just this small group of people here, at Seeds of Wisdom.
No, that is actually online and posted for the whole of the world to know. So is the gold standard announcement.
Where was it published?
Anna von Reitz maintains a publication site. At this time, she's over 5,050 articles. If you go up to her website, you'll also see off to the right a section where you can go to documents. Many of the issues were taken before the Vatican. What the world doesn't recognize is that every corporation on the planet gets its authority to exist under ecclesiastic law, out from underneath the Roman Kyrie. And I don't care what tongue comes out of your mouth, German, Swahili, Japanese. If you have a corporation, it was subject to the Roman Kyrie. In 2013, the Federation took issues before the Vatican. Took it to the Roman Kyrie, and then the Kyrie took it to the Pope and said, you know what? We agree. This is a problem. What are you going to do about it? And each of these issues were singularly brought before the Pope. Well, in 2013, he issued a document called a motu proprio telling the world's corporations to correct their operations and get their cat box in order because their cat box stunk. And he warned everybody, if I have to revisit this, you could be liquidated. Well, in 2017, he gave his second one in the agreement to start liquidation procedures. That accumulated packet that was submitted over time is almost an inch deep. It is not light reading. So if you go down that rabbit hole, you're a stalwart researcher, but you're justly given fair warning. So one of the notices that was sent out, it's called the possession by right. Our service contractors had gone rogue, gone through subsequent bankruptcy actions, and the Federation got to a point and said, okay, there's no assumption of any contract, and no presumption is to be assumed. And that possession of right article was March 25th of 2023. That was the notice of coming back, that we were reclaiming everything, that the contracts were being rolled back to us. Then last year at the end of July, we got word of recognition of international law. So when the United States Inc. concluded and settled their bankruptcy, that corporation ceased to exist. In the meantime, let me put a certain event in context. If you hadn't watched the inauguration of 2016, go look it up and rewatch it. The military comes out of the grandstand, and then Donald comes out and proclaims that this was unlike any other election. we, indicating the military, are handing the power back to you, we the people. The actual we the people he's making reference to are those that are referenced in the Declaration of Independence. We the people is bandied about without a proper comprehension of what that means, where it came from, and by what authority. We the people is occupied by something called a state citizen. We were all born on the land and soil of our respective states and our state nationals of that state. I happen to be a Californian by birthright. California was one of the original 34 states of the Union. However, I chose to step up into the role of a state citizen. The state citizens are responsible for running the state business of your respective state. I helped do that here in Washington. In the role of a national, you get to vote on anything that's inside your state where you're living at right now when you come back. And the state citizen gets to do that as well. But the state citizen is the only one that gets to do the about face and take on the cares and concerns of international affairs, of anything that affects their state from outside the border. So if a new national law gets passed, only the state citizen gets to vote on it. The state citizen is the one that's eligible to repopulate the Confederation of States. The state citizen is the one that's eligible to repopulate the federal republic if we so choose. There's an old saying, with responsibility comes rights. And with those rights come obligation and duty. So when you reclaim yourself, you'll automatically be a national. But you have to raise your hand and let your respective assembly know that you're willing to take on the cares of helping to run the government of the people, for the people, by the people.
Hi, Jim.
Yes.
So let me just clarify. So when you go back to your birth state, you become a national. You're a national, right? Mm-hmm. So what you're saying is what you did is went to California, became a national, and then in Washington, you decided to become a citizen there so that you can help that state and legislate on behalf of that state. Is that what you're saying?
Let me give you some clarity. You don't have to go back to your birth state. When you bring forward a copy of your birth certificate, that's evidence of you being born there. And all you're saying when you do your one-page declaration is, as a Texan. Even though I'm living in Michigan, I'm reclaiming my Texas birthright. However, I choose to lay my head down in Michigan. And when you do that, you take up a domicile in that state. Many of us don't live in our original birth state. I've lived in Washington since I was 6.
I have a question.
Yes, Betsy.
Okay, how does that play if you were born in DC but grew up in Maryland?
Okay. Where was your father born?
Missouri.
You can adopt dad's birth state and claim it to be the root of you.
My mother was born in Pennsylvania. I don't know if that comes into play.
Everything comes through your father.
Okay.
Now, as a side note to your father,
Right.
if you can establish your family genealogy through your father back before the Civil War, you can lay claim to have an inherent right to the Declaration of Independence that cannot be overshadowed. Now, be mindful when you find out that you have an ancestor who was in Kansas in 1850, there were only so many counties in Kansas in 1850. So you would find the town that the ancestor lived in, and then look at the map update and the change and increase of counties over time. So when you go back to the 1850 census, you would go back and say, Book 3, page 18, line 18 through 24. These are my people.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And if you're blessed to be able to go back even farther, let's say the Colonial War, and one of your ancestors were in the war, you might be eligible for the Daughters of the American Revolution. And for you guys, it would be the Sons of the American Revolution. And you might be able to get the Colonial War pension number out of the National Archive.
Wow.
I've done that for my ancestor.
Okay. Wow.
I hope that helps you.
Yeah. Another rabbit hole. Okay. Thank you very much.
Oh, and by the way, you have Ancestry.com, but the LDS Church actually has one of the most complete genealogy record libraries imaginable. They've gone into other countries and pulled genealogies.
My dad did a lot of that. And then my cousin, who's in Missouri, has done a lot of it. So who knows what I'll find out.
Good luck. Happy hunting.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions?
Silver Jim, I don't want to be redundant, but I want to go back to the silver. I mean the basis for the gold-backed dollar. Did Anna Van Rights? Did you start off the conversation tonight with the basis for the gold-backed dollar being discussed by Anna Van Rights, going back to the 1/10 ounce gold basis? Was she declaring that we're going to go back to the gold-backed dollar being the basis for a conversation for the federal dollar. Was that was I catching that right?
Yes, and that article came out April 5th. Since that time, international trade relations have been established. When she made her first announcement that trade relations had been established with several countries, she stated that America now had trade relations with 300 million outside folks. And a couple of weeks later, she announced 400 million.
Uh-huh.
So the inherent solidity of the American Federation gold-based dollar to replace the FRN is firmly in place now.
Is that recognized by the U.S. Treasury? Or should it be?
There are several offices inside the Treasury that have been tapped for accountability. Now, during this time of gold recoupment out of the Philippines, the Federation paid off Australia's debt, and to about a 30 percentile value of gold underlying the FRN to sustain it for a little bit. Had the Federation not done that, China, having been given one of those printing presses, would have gone in and bought Australia and made it a province. During that time, 55,000 metric tons of gold were supposedly sent to the mint to strike eagles. That's right, gold-based coin. Now, the mint, the original contract to run the mint, was granted to the American Federal Republic. And when Lincoln set the Republic aside, the British territorial operation stepped in to run the mint behind our backs. Well, that operational contract had a big heated argument over. And certain key folks in London were told, why would we bother granting you folks that contract when you've gone so off the tracks and so rogue? Nobody should even be dealing with you. In 1913, when the Federal Reserve started issuing the FRN, they traded out our American silver dollar on a one-to-one basis for their FRN. With all the hyperinflation and other printing mechanisms, there's not enough physical silver on planet Earth for them to repay what they owe us. These two entities, the municipal and the British territorial, were supposed to be doing ledger accounting to reconciling the books, and only one side of the books was ever really done for the last 160 some odd years. This is why the national debt got so high. It's the national debt, not the country debt. When they smuggled this Scottish corporation in here and put Lincoln on a train and ran him around the country, our ancestors, unbeknowingly, when they voted for Lincoln, made the declaration that they were actually British citizens voting on a Commonwealth corporation and not American people, because it was illegal and unlawful for an American to vote in a foreign corporation. This is how the democracy got populated. A democracy is not a republican form of government.
This is all verified by Mike Cottrell.
Yep. And a host of other researchers over time. So there's supposed to be a gold treaty. Well, there are certain details about said treaties of who had what authority to issue whatever. Now, when Trump did his global capitulation tour, he basically told who all, we have everything, we know who did what, we have all the communications, and we even have the servers out of Germany, which were a backup server farm by the CIA. You as Saudi Arabia, you as Britain, you as the EU have the same problems as the rest of the world. Blackmail, espionage, drugs, arm. They replace your respective national government with a corporate entity. When you looked at the United Nations table, you were looking at corporate entities in a global interlocking trust directorate over 800 large. And each of these trust directorates had unelected bureaucrats posted in key positions, unaccountable to the people, pulling the strings. And this is why the feeling was that the government, which was actually a corporation, never listened to anybody. Because those bureaucrats are selected, not elected. Next question. Anybody?
Well, I'm just trying to put my head around what you were just saying. Our Congress was elected, and they're supposed, huh?
When?
No, I'm talking about with the corporate. Even though they were corporate, they were still elected to do work for us, weren't they? Or not?
Who's they?
They is the Congress of the corporation.
Okay, so how that corporation functions is the shareholders of the corporation are expressing their opinion of who to give their proxy to. The actual corporate Congress in the Electoral College elects or selects who is going to be the president and CEO of that corporation. The British territorial citizenry elects their internal operating characters. But that's not American. That's a foreign for-profit corporation. And only the shareholders get to vote in it. And how do you know about the shareholders? They're the ones that are registered. And again, when you bring up Regis, it's a royal act. Therefore, it's a Commonwealth corporation.
It's so confusing, I'll be honest with you. Oh gosh. It's hard to keep track of what's the corporation and who does the corporation really represent. Not us, that's for sure.
Well, supposedly from their viewpoint, we all entered into some kind of contract and waived our American birthright and became part of the corporation to be recognized as artificial entities known as persons. Now, here in Washington was one of 16 so-called states in waiting after the Civil War. Well, those 34 states of the Union that existed pre-war, amongst themselves, what are we going to do about these other 16 states on paper who are waiting to be admitted to the Union? And so they had a vote amongst themselves. And they said, well, let's give everybody an opportunity to come into the Union. And they unanimously said, okay, if the respective state on paper wished to join, they would be recognized and retroactive to the so-called state admission to the Union. So we 16 states formally had an internal vote and accepted to accept admission into the American states of the Union. And that vote took formal acceptance effective October 1 of 2020. So since September 4 years ago when we held the vote, all 50 states of the Union of States are present, alive, filled with living people, and accounted for. This is in part why they removed American history, because if you don't know your history, you don't know who you are. Innately, I happen to have a really deep sense of curiosity. I'll put on a snorkel to go dive in the rabbit hole, because I'll probably find water at the bottom of it and keep going.
Okay, let me ask you another question. We are at the point where the corporation part of all of this is getting ready to hold an election. And most of the people in the United States, even the illegal invaders, are going to be voting there, and they're going to elect someone. But that no longer exists. The corporation no longer exists. You said that it is now bankrupt, and we are now that we are now back on the land. What does that mean, that we are back on the land? Because we are right now part of the corporation.
Some of you
unless we have filled out our paperwork and made a status change. So where do we stand at this point? We're not in the corporation, and we're not in the Federation of States. So, or we're not a state national. So what does that mean? What are we? I'm not really sure.
Well, in limbo, actually, there's a word called devolution. You might have heard Trump say once in a while, but he put some executive orders in place while he was still CEO of said corporation. And he put some stuff in play for continuity of operations. Well, we're going to hear about the need for new elections within so many days. It's 120 days. And here in Washington, we're getting ready to have formal American elections. And registered voters cannot vote in it. It is illegal and unlawful for a registered voter. It'd be just like me going over to France and voting in a France election. As a declared Brit, your mother country is England and the Isle. You just happen to be here providing goods and services to the American people if you can find one. However, the moment you wake up and realize this fraud was done to you, fraud vitiates everything all the way back to the moment of the original act. So your birth certificate being created, they declared you dead on paper and probated your estate into a usufructuary trust. And they've been managing it behind your back. And you've been the donator of your life's blood, sweat, tears, and energy to this thing. Well, you have the right to cancel your donation, especially when you find out these cretins went off the track, went rogue, breach of trust. It's perfectly within your right to take control of what is you and what's rightfully owed you. So this corporation having been dissolved and us coming under recognized land law, we're reaching out to the state legislatures because they're corporate service providers. Many of those are friends, families, and our neighbors who went through the public education system and have the exact same basic knowledge as you and I before something came in on the air. They don't know what they don't know, and they fell hook, line, and sinker for the BS. So we're having to do an education outreach and bringing certain things to their awareness that, let's say, as a sheriff functioning in the corporate capacity, they were actually left out twisting in the wind, bearing full, complete, private, commercial liability for their actions because the county officials did not have proper bonds in place with proper oaths connected to the bond, meeting certain criteria to hold a public office, capital P, capital O office. Instead, they were holding little p, little o offices in a private corporate capacity. And they're going to have a hard time accepting that in working for these corporate entities, they've never been covered under the Declaration of Independence, and neither has their family, because they're residents. And they're merely here at the whim of the Residency Act of 1790. This is going to be a bombshell shock. And we recognize it. Not everyone's going to be able to accept or wrap their mind around it. I certainly remember my awakening moment. I was in a law archive, and I had been struggling to comprehend vocabulary and concepts. And one day the light bulb went off and click. And I just kind of jerked straight up and realized I was always a good student. I was National Honor Society. Carried something like a 3.7 GPA. But I realized half of everything I knew was wrong and the other half was built on a functional lie. So my entire world with that grasp changed. So if I went through it, and I'm considering myself fairly normal, I have pity on people when they go into a state of despair and disbelief and shock. Some people may even have an emotional breakdown to realize they've lived their entire life on the premise of a lie. What happens when you're a third and fourth year law student? Mommy and daddy's shelled out $3, $4, maybe even $500,000 for an Ivy League juris education, and someone suddenly finds out when they come out with their degree, they're taking a null kendere oath and suddenly are agents of the Crown of England. And mommy and daddy find out they've just wasted a whole bunch of money on a useless degree. That's one expensive piece of paper to go flip burgers with. Now, the universities that have the law schools in it are going to be tapped by their respective state assemblies and being given notice that they're having to convert their entire program, or their charter will be yanked. And I don't give a rat's behind if it's Yale, Duke, Princeton, Pepperdine, or the University of Washington. And the Alumni Association of those respective law schools are going to freak out. here in Washington, we've already given the Washington Bar Association notice. We had 3 Western Washington county prosecutors step down this last election cycle when they were queried by a reporter. The younger guy, who was a one-time appointee, was asked, how come you're not running for re-election? And he just kind of grabbed his lapels and said, well, the legal landscape in Washington has changed, and I think it's time for me to move on. That's all he said. Many other states are going to be in a very similar condition here shortly. Now, there's a court case from 1866 that stated when there is a lawful civilian court present, the military district courts cannot have a civilian brought before them. And it's called Milligan Ex Parte, 2 U.S. 71. And depending upon if you're looking at it from the other side of the condition, it's 71 U.S. 2. The British territorial sees the court case as one condition, and the American side sees it in a different condition. And so some court cases have been intentionally rewritten so that people in general do not recognize the dual jurisdictional play on the court case. Well, several states of the Union at this point have issued a notification to the military wrapped around this court case. So all branches of the military, the Pentagon, Army, Navy, Coast Guard, Space Force, the Judge Advocate General to the Joint Chiefs of Staff was served. And Donald Trump got served at Mar-a-Lago. They were all given notice. And for those states who have issued this document, it's the formal announcement that the American common law courts are restored in that state. Under the Judiciary Act of 1789, if you were to read it, you'll find the courts of superior co-contemporaneous jurisdiction. That happens to be the American common law side of things. All kinds of arcane vocabulary is something that those that have the blessing of that mindset can learn about. So here on Washington, I am the co-author of that document. And I do believe if you go upstream in the Constitution room, you'll be able to find the Milligan Notice. It has all the entities of DC and the registered mail number so you can track it through the postal system. And you'll be able to see all the entities on Washington that were served notice. Such as the Washington Constitutional Sheriff's Association, the Washington State Sheriff's Association, the State Association of Counties, the Attorney General, Secretary of State, and the judiciary courts of the state of Washington were served notice. This is not a light undertaking to reestablish what is truly owed us. So when you do your documents and you reach out on that contact page to your state assembly, be kind of patient because some assemblies are more populated than others. Now, Texas is broken into 5 zones and has 5 coordinators on it. California has 3 zones and 3 co-coordinators. But it's a worthwhile journey. Now, I recommend a thumb drive to everybody. And I recommend a specific model. It's made by Kingston, and you can find them up on eBay. And this specific model is a D as in dog, T as in Thomas, S as in Sam, E as in Edward, -9. It's a totally metal housing thumb drive that you can put on your key ring, and you can sit on your key ring, and this thumb drive is virtually indestructible. As you gather information, drag it over to the thumb drive. This way, when you're sharing stuff to friends and family, you can say, hey, you have your laptop with you. I got something to share. Boom, boom. Drag and drop. Because in reality, what we're doing is we're in the middle of an American rescue operation. Helping people to recognize that they have an issue in their life and helping them to come home. Any other questions?
Well, I'm just, this is Arjax again. I'm just looking at all the people in the United States. There's so many that know nothing about what's going on. And how in the world are we all going to be able to reach all of these people? And is there ever going to be an announcement by anyone that says, that election that that was just held is not really a good, that's not a legal election? I mean,
it is a legal election for a legal entity.
But the entity is bankrupt and gone, you said.
Well, okay, so in the bankruptcy, they were in the past fronting their bankruptcy debts onto our backs as Americans and living people. That bankruptcy debt scheme has been denied. We do not accept and we will not allow. So when you look at the national debt, you're going to have odious debt. Look up the definition of odious. And it's debt created where we, the supposed folks, didn't gain any benefit from because of the Federal Reserve fractional banking system. Buried in the 1913 Act is something called Regulation Z. We Americans had an exemption in there, but if you didn't know that the exemption existed, you couldn't exercise it. And they buried it in the TILA, Truth in Lending Act, paperwork. And like so many of us, we go get a loan and we go to the signing table and they throw us the keys and we run out of there like little kids from the candy shop. Well, it was discovered that there's a check on the other side waiting for us to claim it as an American. So by not claiming that check, they picked it up, held on to it for a certain period of time, and then declared it as abandoned property that they could claim and use. None of that will be going forward in the restructuring of America. You're going to hear about a prepaid credit certificate that's also going to be put out into the population. Many banking changes are coming. But in order to qualify for some of these new items and structures, you're going to have to be able to demonstrate that you're a redeclared American. Because a U.S. citizen will not have access to our trade banks and our prosperity institutions. We've been
Sounds like there's a lot of work that has to be done then. A lot of people. I mean, look, millions, what is it, 350 million at least in the U.S.?
Yeah,
That's
about
a
that.
lot of people. Yeah, that's a lot of people that you have to notify and let them and teach them how to go about reclaiming who they really are.
Well, the various states' assemblies have outreach committees. Here in Washington, we do a circuit where we call is the road show. We will do publication, outreach, newspapers, flyers, pamphlets that the Washington Assembly is coming into town on a certain date. And anybody that is either curious or quasi-aware can come with their paperwork and have it taken care of and submitted before a recording secretary. A recording secretary processes the paperwork and is under the authority of the Federation of States as a liaison officer. This allows the Federation of States to reach into the bankruptcy slush fund pile and extract our birthright Sestakavi estate trust. There's going to be a time, probably a Christmas, New Year's time frame, where those who have reclaimed themselves may get a surprise Christmas present.
That sounds good.
So, Jim, time frame wise, how long does it take from submission to acknowledgement? Does it take the paperwork to go through the system?
Okay, if you have your one pager, your 2 witness testimonies, and a scanned copy of your birth certificate, there's a recording process and then there's a publication process. The recording process is right there in front of the recording secretary. You're in the official record of the state. Now, when we publish it, that publication is internationally accessible. And depending upon how many recording secretaries and how much of a backlog you have, that can be a matter of days to a week, maybe a little longer. There is a new identification card coming down through the Global Family Bank system. We found out what the international heartburn was. Our original credential cards that were issued to us did not have an expiration date, and they didn't have a signature on it. Well, at the negotiation table, our fiduciary leaned into them and said, you do recognize that we're living people and that when we expire, we're actually dead. So unlike a driver's license, our credential cards will have longer periods of activity. And I'm hearing our cards will be good until 2035. And you're going to have to find out from your respective assembly what they charge for this recording and publication. Some of the assemblies don't charge very much. Here in Washington, it's $25 to record and $25 to publish. And then getting a credential card is $50.
Okay. Well, I've had to redo a couple of things, but that's it's just inconsequential. That's not much.
Well, when you contact your respective assembly, ask them what they charge for fees. All of us are volunteers, by the way. We're not paid a dime. Like I said earlier, this is a rescue operation. And those of us that have stepped forward in certain capacities are all volunteers. Many of us recognize what's at stake.
You talked about advising one lady that was to about her dad's going back on her dad's state of birth. Can you go a step beyond that and say what evidence she had to use as her dad's state of birth as her, because that affects my bride's state of birth. My bride was born in Japan, and what evidence should I use as her state of birth?
Okay. Bring forth her naturalization paperwork and there is a different one-page declaration for her to adopt being an American.
Okay. I'm not sure she has any of that, but I'll bring what I have.
Okay. Now, if someone works for the state entity or the federal government in the municipal, they can claim their birthright so that when they step off that job, they can change hats. And when they totally retire, they can cast off the dual citizenship and pick up their entire God-given birthright package. I will work to get those documents posted up in the Constitution page. That way people can get the appropriate instrument for their use. Well, it's 4 minutes till 8. It's almost 11 p.m. Eastern time. So I want to close this off in the next few minutes. Let everybody enjoy the rest of their evening. So if you found tonight's conversation intriguing, please share it. Bring others to the table. I do this as an outreach. The more people that know the story of what happened to us, it will make sense why everything feels weird.
Well, I want to thank you, Jim, for another enlightening call. We'll put it up on YouTube as soon as we can. Lots of information, and to bring in other little pieces of NESARA and all that, I thought was fascinating. So let's find out who we are and what our roots are and start digging in here. So I want to thank everybody, and we'll see you next Friday, and the call will be on YouTube. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Thank you, everyone, for coming out. Be safe. And walk around with a smile, because the restoration of America is underway. It's a good time to be alive. Catch you later.